What do we actually mean when we say that the UK economy is broken? It's something we hear a lot, but what does that really mean? Well, in this video, we're going to begin to find out. So welcome to Bonkers Economics. This is episode 2 in our series of 12 things that are broken about the UK economy. And they're represented by the 12 images you can see here. And we're going through them one by one. And last week we looked at this image here. And today we're moving on to this one, which is a sort of sister image to the one we looked at last week. Now, before we get into that, let's just say something quickly which we don't often talk about, which is what do we mean by wealth? What do we mean by wealth production? What do we mean by the economy, fundamentally? Well, I think it's important that we think about that, because otherwise we can't really make good decisions. And clearly wealth is that which improves the quality of our lives. It keeps us alive, it makes our lives worth living. So wealth includes a whole range of things, from food and housing and clothing and that sort of thing, and phones and all sorts of things that we like to have on the one hand, but also security, a sense of safety. It includes our relationships, it includes our sense of family, it includes a good night's sleep. There's all sorts of things that improve the quality of our lives, which we must think of as wealth, which are fundamentally affected by our economic situation. We can't have a good night's sleep if we're doing 5 jobs and we have to get up at 3 in the morning. We can't have a good night's sleep if we're worrying constantly about where the money is coming from. It affects our relationships, it affects all sorts of things. So the economy is bound up with the quality of our lives. And when we talk about wealth, we need to talk about all sorts of things that matter to us over and above the basics. And then beyond that, there's something else, which is that wealth is actually stuff that we can use. So obviously food, drink, housing, that sort of thing, these are things that we need, that we use. So if somebody's making clothes or somebody's baking bread or somebody's building a house, then they're creating something which is really useful. And that's clearly wealth, which we can make use of in our lives. But if somebody is not actually doing that, but they're, for example, making a financial return on a transaction which doesn't produce anything new, then that's not terribly useful. And that's something which a lot of our economy now consists of. So it's really important that we understand that there are more than one way of measuring economic activity. And what we tend to do is we measure it in terms of money turnover. And when we do that, some trader in the City of London who's just turning over billions of pounds and making a little profit along the way, but not actually producing anything, just taking a cut for themselves, their economic activity, as it's called, is considered to be just as valuable as somebody who's baking bread, for example. In fact, more valuable, because there's much more money in trading in the City of London than there is in baking bread. But of course, we can't eat, as it were. We can't live off the proceeds of trading in the City of London, not collectively, because those proceeds have come from somebody else. They're not new, nothing new is being created. Whereas the bread is new, it's being created, and we can eat that, and we can all share it. And that's something which will sustain our lives. So that's absolutely key to this, and we're going to see that in this image now. If we look at the image, well, the image is this one here. And as I say, we started last week with this one, which shows the different sections of the economy, from agriculture on the left here, which is absolutely minute, through to financial services and business services here, and the rental market. And we can see that there's a relatively small amount of really productive activity in the economy. And at this end, there's a huge amount of what we call extractive activity. That's activity, the purpose of which is to try to get hold of some of the money, some of the wealth that's being produced by the people down here. And now this part of the economy is really large, and this productive part of the economy is quite small. So that's what we looked at in the first video in this series. Now if we move on to this image, we can see how things have changed in the last 60 or 70 years. So what we have here on the left is the economy in 1950. And what we have on the right, that's actually the figures of 2015, because that's the figures that we have. And what they show is the transition, if you like, in the nature of different activities in the economy over that period. And what we've got in the green section, well, that's the productive economy. That's the economy which is making stuff, which is doing stuff which is really useful, construction, manufacturing, agriculture, things like that. Also includes energy production, includes a whole load of services like haircuts and stuff like that, things that are really useful, and they are all contained in that section there. And you can see that in 1950 it was a really big part of the economy, and now 2015 it's much, much smaller. And then moving down the image we come to something else, which is this is actually health and education, and that's actually grown quite a bit, not surprisingly, in the last 70 odd years or so. That's because, for example, people stay at school much longer, many more people go to university, that sort of thing. So that's grown, and the health sector has grown too. And then here we've got all the intermediate stuff. We've got sort of transport, and we've got the supply chain, we've got things like basic banking, and we've got things like shops and wholesalers and all that sort of thing. And that's roughly the same size. It's actually slightly smaller now than it was then, but it's very, very similar in size as a part of the economy. And then down the bottom in the sort of pinky red section, that's where the real trouble is, because this was the financial and business sector, the non-productive sector of the economy, if you like, back in 1950, and that was about 5% of the total economy. And here now, in 2015, it's about 30%. So what we've seen is a direct transfer of activity in the economy from productive to unproductive. And let's just remind ourselves what that means. That means that we are counting as useful economic activity things which turn money over, things which transfer money from one person to another, things which extract wealth for wealthy people, make rich people richer, if you like, but don't actually produce anything new. And we're counting that as economic activity. We're counting that as being useful in the economy, and that's represented in this big pink section here. And we're forgetting that to create real wealth in the economy, what we need is this big green section here. We need to be making stuff and doing stuff and producing stuff that we can use and consume. And that will allow us to import much less from abroad, for example, which would be a great thing. At the moment, about half of our food comes from abroad. We're quite capable of growing tomatoes in greenhouses in our own country. We don't have to buy them from Holland, for example. So there's a huge dearth now of actual productive activity in the UK economy, and that goes to the heart of why the economy is broken, because the economy is not doing economics. It's not producing the stuff that we need to live. It's not producing stuff that will improve the quality of our lives. The economy has become caught up in this whole section down here, which is all about extracting money from the system without actually doing anything economically useful. And that's a transition that's been happening over quite a long time. It really got going with a start in the 1980s. The reforms in the 1980s, where we went, as we were told, we were going from a production economy to a services economy. That's really when the trouble started. And the trouble is that distinction between production and services is not really terribly useful, because a lot of services are very useful and a lot of services are merely transactional. And a certain amount of production is useful and some production is actually not terribly useful. So it's not a good way of looking at the economy. The way we need to look at the economy is it productive or transactional? Is it producing stuff we really want? Or is it just producing transactions, more and more transactions in which things change hands and nothing new is created? And so long as that is going on, then things are just going to get worse and worse. I call this image the slippery slope, and you can see why, because we're on a slippery slope to producing less and less and less in the economy, and more money being extracted. And of course, an awful lot of this money that's being extracted, incidentally, is going abroad, because so much now of the UK's economic infrastructure, so many companies, so many of our important industries like water and electricity and railways and all those sort of things, so many of the UK is now owned by foreigners. And so this extraction that's going on down here, a lot of that money is going abroad, and that's just going to get bigger and bigger as the years go by, and this is going to get smaller and smaller, and ultimately we're not only going to be not producing anything for ourselves, we're also not going to own anything for ourselves either. We're going to be owned exclusively by foreign investors. So that's a serious issue, and that is, if you like, in a nutshell, one big thing which is wrong with the UK economy, one big thing that is broken, and the government isn't going to shift that, it's not going to change that until it starts taking this question of production much more seriously. And in order to do that, it has to really stop emphasising the importance of this extractive sector. It needs to change the rules so that it's much less attractive in the UK to invest in financial service activity, for example, and much more likely to be remunerative to invest in real productive activity. And the government can do that because the government controls to a large extent where money goes in the economy, or it can control it if it chooses to. So there we go, that is the answer to that. That is number 2 in our series, what is broken about the UK economy, more or less summed up in this image. And there's lots more you can learn about it on the website, which is bonkerseconomics.net. So please do check that out. Please also do tell your friends. If you've liked this video, please like the video. Please subscribe if you haven't done so. And if you have, thank you very much. And I look forward to talking to you about the next image next week.